I am just going to say, ladies and gentlemen, legendary Muppeteer Steve Whitmire.
Oh, I'm fine with it, yeah.
Video's good.
Yeah. Video is good. It's always nice to look like you're alive. Yeah. Hi, what is everybody? Thank you all for coming. This is terrific. Did I talk into this?
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess we will open it up to any questions.
We can do that, yeah. I figured I don't have a lot to start out with. I'm just glad you all came to the panel, and I've seen a few of you today already, and many of you. I met you, and many people had good questions that when they came to the table, so I thought it made sense, you can repeat those if you want for the benefit of everybody, but whatever you guys want to talk about is good.
If I may ask Mr. Whitmire, I'm sure you've probably been inundated with this question, I don't know how many times. But what's it like to follow the footsteps?
Yeah. You guys all heard that question, I think, right? Well, it was really difficult right after Jim died to do that, because none of us really knew for sure whether the Muppets would go on. And I think either the first or second day after Jim passed away, let's start on a really low note here, right? Yeah. Oh my God, we'll get this out of the way. We all gathered, we being Frank Oz and the other puppeteers and the family, to talk about whether this would continue, because we were really considering, do we keep trying to keep the Muppets going? And everyone unanimously felt that Jim would have wanted the characters to continue on. At that point in 1990, he was in the process of trying to sell his, well, not trying, he was selling his company to Disney. And his primary purpose, well, there were two things. One was that he felt that Disney would, he felt like they were going to take good care of the characters, but also it would give him the opportunity to move on and do other creative things. And Jim was always looking to the next thing, the next thing. You talk to him about something he did 10 years ago, and he'd talk about it, but he really just wanted to keep going. He had this new idea for this new thing, and so. But specifically to your question, if you mean specifically to take over trying to do a character like Kermit, it was really daunting and really hard. Kermit was so well known, established. He was like 35 years on this planet at that point. And I think the only thing that made it possible for me to do it, even to whatever extent I was able to do it, was having been around Jim, having worked with Jim for about a dozen years before he passed away. And that gave me the opportunity to watch him as he was performing Kermit and be around him and see the parts and the aspects of Jim and his personality that translated into Kermit. And there was a lot of that, and Jim was so associated with Kermit. So it was incredibly important to me, and I think important to the character, being able to continue to try to keep Jim's influence and those things alive and a part of Kermit. And at the same time, I didn't want to just copy everything Jim did, which is what you would do, I think, if you didn't know Jim. You might go look at, these days you might look at YouTube, or you might look at the old work and you might say, okay, well, I'll just copy all that. But that's not what Jim would have done, and the characters were always evolving and growing, so he needed to be able to do that. So that was the trickiest part. That was the hardest part, was being able to keep Jim as the foundation of this thing, but let it continue to grow. Otherwise, Kermit would just have become a very stale kind of copy, I think did I answer your question? I think I did. It was hard. Yeah.
Recall hearing that some of the tech guys, early carpenters, when Kira was killed, actually lost it. Do you recall any moment where the character, or when you were interacting, where obviously you saw the plastic and felt where there was a moment where you just kind of lost the fact that it was just up and you kind of got emotionally involved?
Well, yeah, there's emotionally involved and there's emotionally involved. In a situation like that, I would think that, and I was there when that happened, and I think it's after you've worked around these characters for a while, as a crew person, or probably less as a puppeteer, but as a crew person, they do really start to exist as these real entities in the world. They really aren't quite puppets anymore. You know, they're aspects of the performers, obviously, but I know when I started doing a character like Kermit, I became aware very quickly that there is this kind of force in the world that was Kermit the Frog that really is almost separate from Jim or even from me. People know Kermit, but they don't necessarily know me, and many of them don't know Jim. So it's like he's a third party, you know, he's this other living thing to a really large degree. And I think if you work on a film set or on a TV show, and these characters seem alive every day, you get to know them, you know, and you expect to see them alive. And when you do a scene like that where she gets basically stabbed in the back and falls over, you know, it affects people. That wouldn't have affected me because I'm looking at it technically, but I understand the emotion of that. What's that?
I wasn't trying to sound cynical.
No, I understand. And it's interesting. I've been on sets. We would go to do a Kermit appearance on a show, and you have these big, burly kind of, you know, grips and guys who work on the set, and they've seen everything, and they're kind of jaded Hollywood guys, you know. Some of them are young, but they've seen it all. And yet when it came time if people wanted photos with Kermit, they would oftentimes stand next to Kermit, and they couldn't hold back the tears. Because, you know, and they would get embarrassed, and they'd say, I would never expected to have this reaction, you know. But the Muppets have spanned so many generations, you know, and I think it touches people, it brings up parts of their lives, you know, and then memories of family and their childhood and different things, and it might not even be the Muppets themselves, but it might bring up some other thing, you know, and people do react very emotionally to them.
Well, you know, to touch, I mean, I remember the famous interview they've used in all the highlight clips of Jim, where he's got Kermit on his hand and he's talking, and he's like, nobody pays attention to the man with the beard.
Right.
They all look at Kermit.
Right.
Because they're interviewing Kermit, they're not interviewing Jim, they're not interviewing you, they're talking to the frog.
Yeah. It's interesting. There were times once in a while where I would do something like this, where I was on stage and I would have Kermit. And people really, they mostly always want to talk to Kermit, which makes perfect sense. And it's as though a second person is there on the stage. And I was always trying to be very conscious when I was performing Kermit, like if I had a puppet on my hand right now, to keep that puppet, that character alive throughout. You know, you kind of split your brain a little bit to do that. That's okay.
I know that Edgar Bergen was a strong influence on Henson.
Yeah.
I heard Bergen was a very shy guy, but Charlie McCarthy really had to.
Right.
And I heard that Henson was a very shy guy, but Kermit was a guy who was a bit more outgoing and Ralph. And would you say that you noticed any differences of you and private versus when you slapped a guy in your hand?
Me? Well, probably, yeah. I think that all these characters, you know, like any actor would probably tell you, they are a part of they come from a part of the person, a part of the performer. And especially so with the Muppets, because the performers underneath them are not visible. So you really are projecting aspects of yourself out through these characters. And it's all, you know, you can, I guess from an acting point of view, you could try to do a character that might not be an aspect of yourself necessarily, but we oftentimes do that. I mean, they always kind of slip into being a part of us. So things, you know, it's basically just a strange form of therapy. You know, you're doing these, you know, they're just things that come out once you put a puppet on. And what's really fun, what's really interesting, is when you do this for a while, and then you find yourself in a room full of new puppeteers who haven't done as much of this work, and everything they're saying is through their puppet. It's just puppets talking to each other, and boy, do the inside psyches come out there. You know, oh yeah. You know, they're just not holding back. You're saying, whoa,
So
that's
things
who
a
you
puppet
are.
can say that you can't say.
Yes, and maybe they're not even realizing that as they're saying it, you know?
I do want to, we circled to with Jim's passing and you taking him for Kermit, but I want to circle back earlier
Sure.
to your creation of Otis, which got you the job towards, because you had the show in Atlanta,
That's
the
true.
afternoon show, right? And that kind of
I did, yeah, that was my earliest,
you to it.
that was kind of my earliest real puppet job. I mean, I got interested in the Muppets to the point where I started trying to build my own stuff when I was 10. And by the time I got toward the end of my high school years, as the nerdy puppet guy in high school, I wanted to do something, and I went through this whole series of things. One of the characters I created was this guy named Otis, who was kind of a beach bum. You might find pictures of him on the internet. In fact, the funny part is I'm finding pictures of him on the internet that I don't even have. I didn't know they existed. I guess these were people who snapped pictures at some point for some reason, which is kind of fun. I have almost no record of this character at all. But suddenly, what that really facilitated for me in my growth as a puppeteer was that I did this local Atlanta television show for 2.5 hours live every day for 6 months. And this was right at the end of my high school years, and it was like going to puppet college, if there was such a thing. It was the chance. I had never worked with television monitors. I'd always done live puppety things in high school stuff. And that's a vital tool with the Muppets, is that we always watch the television monitor as we're performing, so we can see what the audience is going to see at the end of the day. We're really becoming the audience. So I got a little bit of skill in doing that, doing this local show in Atlanta, and that led me into my time with the Muppets. So I had a lot more to learn, but that got me started in that.
I'm sure you've drawn the similarities with Jim, with Sam and Friends,
Yeah.
at the college on local TV, and then it's like a progression of
Yeah.
career. But
There were some similarities between, and I didn't know that. I didn't know at that point, I didn't know Jim's, what Jim had gone through as a young person getting started. But we kind of got into it in a similar way at similar times, influenced by certain things. And our trajectory, when I got the job with the Muppets, I wasn't looking for a job with the Muppets. It was great, and it was a dream come true, but it really wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to do local puppet things in Atlanta because I didn't know I could get a job with the Muppets. I hadn't pursued that. And it was one of those really amazing things that happened with almost me not having to put any effort into making it happen. I met Carol Spinney, who did Big Bird. He retired just a little while ago. And Carol was in Atlanta for this puppetry festival. I was there as an 17, 18-year-old kid with my own puppet, and Carol watched my puppet, and I happened to be the only person who was doing Muppet-style puppets, which is the basic mouth like this and the hands that were on the sticks and the rods. And he went away. I expected never to really see him again necessarily, and he called me about 6 months later and said Jim was looking for new people, and he thought I should audition, and that's how it happened. And by the way, an audition with Jim at that point was to just go, he flew me up to New York, and we sat together for about 4 days and got to know each other. We did a little bit with puppets, but most of it was just about whether or not he felt that was someone who would fit in with his team. That was far more important to him than my skill as a puppeteer.
okay.
And I had so much to learn in that arena. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I'm going to proceed with Otis, the creation of Rizzo the Rat.
Thanks. Ben, Rizzo fan. Well, Rizzo happened, some of you may have heard this story, I don't know. But Rizzo was because I was on the Muppet Show, and Jim would encourage us. If you've seen the Muppet Show, there was a backstage area where Kermit was at his desk, and the stars would pass through, and you saw the stairs and a little balcony in the dressing rooms. And Jim would encourage those of us who were the new, young, learning puppeteers to just, we're going to shoot this now. We didn't have any lines or characters. He said, grab any puppet you want to and just populate the background of this scene. Feel free to do whatever you want and upstage us and try to draw the attention. And he really encouraged us to do that while he's down front trying to do what he's doing. So I found this box full of rat puppets that were built. I think they were built, he did a special back in the early 70s called The Musicians of Bremen. And I think these rats might have been built for that, and they were pretty crude little puppets that were on sticks, and they just flopped around. They didn't even have mouths that worked, I think. And I grabbed one of these, and because we could grab anything, right? And Kermit's delivering his dialogue up next to the desk, and Fozzie goes through and all these characters. And so I just had this little rat come up and stand next to Kermit and just like watch what he was doing and look up at Kermit when Kermit would talk. And he was just annoying. He was like this annoying little thing in the corner of the frame. And Jim got through the scene, and at the end he just cracked up laughing, and he said, "Where did you get that puppet? That's a terrible puppet." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I found it under the steps in a box, you know, or something." And he said, "Oh, it's hilarious." And he said, "We're going to make that rat a star." And you know, and I said, "Okay." So he said, "So think about the character, think about the name." And he said, "If you want to, rebuild the puppet," which he let me. I didn't rebuild it. It was rebuilt by Jim Gutnick, who's a great puppet builder. But we redesigned how he worked, got rid of the long stick, and I got my hand inside of him, which is an important puppet thing, by the way, because for me, the further you're removed from the puppet, I think the harder it is to make the puppet move well. So we got Rizzo down to this little mechanism that I designed where I could run him with my hand inside of his body and all that stuff. So then Rizzo suddenly was around. He was a cast member. I don't think he really came into his own until Muppets Take Manhattan, which was
The rat scat scene.
yeah, that whole area when he was a part of that film, because well, yeah, that was a Christopher Reeve show, and that was the first time he was called by name. I believe it was. Yeah, they did a lot of things like that, and Rizzo it was tough for me to do Rizzo in a scene like that because I was such an inexperienced performer. From the puppetry standpoint, I was fine. I could make him move. But I wasn't a strong actor. And I had Jerry Nelson and Richard Hunt, two of our main guys, both kind of New York guys, and strong voices and strong characters, and they were doing the rats around Rizzo. Rizzo was supposed to be the leader of the rats, and I had these two incredibly phenomenal performers that were just so much better than me at doing. Like, I'm a guy from Atlanta, and I'm 19 years old. I don't even know how to do a New York accent at that point. So, so their rats were strong, and mine was kind of weak, and he was supposed to be the leader, and it was really hard. So all of that happened, but it took me that's about 4 or 5 years that it took me to get comfortable enough and strong enough as a performer to be able to do Rizzo where he was at Muppets Take Manhattan. And a lot of that development for me happened as a performer because we were also doing Fraggle Rock. Yeah, I know, but he wasn't terribly strong in that. It was still at this early. Yeah, they gave me all these opportunities, but it was just learning for me, making my way towards him. And Rizzo really got good as time went on. I mean, I got more comfortable with the character and the accent and who I wanted him to be, and all those things that you do as an actor, which I didn't start out doing. I was a pretty good puppeteer, and I knew how to make a puppet move, but in terms of the performance side of it, I had so much to learn.
Any question over here?
I kind of want to think a couple of questions. First off, I want to say, it's great to have you and Brett here because Mickey Mouse and Kermit Frog are two of the most iconic characters.
Oh, thank you.
Having like cool voices here, having voices there. So
Brett's terrific. He's a nice guy.
So I have a couple of questions. First off, question was, obviously Muppets with a lot of celebrities and everything, and one of the things I love about is like the celebrity workshop, but when the press junkets, every time it's always like very funny, very like improv kind of thing, and I really love the aspect of Muppets. And do you think that it's because you want to with the actors you talk to them? And the second question is kind of like I kind of lump the questions.
That's okay.
I did watch that movie, Muppet Murder movie, and I gotta say, that really was kind of off-putting because I felt like it was true for crude reasons. It wasn't really adult way. And I don't know, I just want to say, I know Muppets are not limited to little kids. They're limited to more stuff. You can do anything more. That particular movie felt like it kind of just felt crude for crude. And one last thing. I hear you talking, I hear your voice as Rizzo and Kermit. Here's often, I love Rizzo. And I was wondering if that like a Rizzo, Kermit kind of back and forth kind of thing. He wants a couple of things.
You know what? I generally, sorry to disappoint you on that, but I don't really do the voices on panels because I'm not doing them anymore, and I feel like it's a little bit unfair to people who are trying to learn them now. Plus, I don't own them, so I'm technically not performing them. So I won't do the voices. But I could speak to your other question, which was about the celebrities, I think, was the question. I wasn't a part of Happy Time Murders, and technically you should know that Happy Time Murders is not the Muppets. A lot of people don't actually realize that the Henson company, the Henson family, sold the Muppets characters to Disney quite a long time ago. It was about 16, 17 years ago. And at that point, those of us who were the performers of the Muppets kind of went along with that deal. I mean, we, you know, not officially, but because we stayed associated with the Muppets, so we really were working mostly with Disney with those characters. So Happy Time was a separate project that Brian Henson did, and a totally different thing. I'm not going to comment on it, but a lot of people feel the way you feel. And the primary reason I won't comment on it is because I haven't seen it. But in terms of the work with the celebrities, once the most fun is to get to a level with a character like Kermit or Rizzo or any of them that you've performed for so long that you're performing them is just second nature. You just fall into the character and they become alive and they are doing their thing. And when you work with celebrities who are really good actors, obviously they are also really good improvisationally, and you know, whatever you do, whether they're playing a role in one of the projects you're doing or whether they are just being themselves in an interview, it's just incredibly fun to and I used to find that, you know, I would go on the Tonight Show when Jay Leno was there, or even more recently with Jimmy Fallon, or one of my favorite interviews that I ever did was Kermit with Ellen DeGeneres. Just loved it. You can find that on YouTube. I love it. She was so great. And really the funny part of that one was she's hilarious, but her temperament is a bit like Kermit. They're both sort of almost like the straight men who are funny. You know, they play that role. She was great with Kermit, and it's an interview I always wanted to do. And I would find that doing those kind of interviews, I started to learn more about the characters that I was performing, if that makes sense. They would be put in situations and say things and do things that I wasn't expecting to say or do, and suddenly it would open up a new little door for them, you know, a new part of their life and their history. And then that would become incorporated into the next film. You know, now that's part of Kermit or whoever. You know, and in many ways some of that is lost now, which is a little bit sad. Jim's influence has faded away a bit. There are very few people involved with the Muppets now that knew Jim, that knew him firsthand. And, you know, things change. I mean, I understand that. But I feel like a lot of the success of the Muppets over the years and their connection with all of you was due to Jim's particular way of doing things and his philosophies and his influence, the way we approach the characters surrounding Jim's characters. You know, so that's kind of important to their. It's as though, you know, they say that perhaps the universe started with a Big Bang, and everything spread out from the sun. Well, that's kind of how the Muppets were. There was Jim, and there was this Big Bang. It was called the Muppet Show, you know, where all these characters happened, and it was just this explosion of creativity, and it expands, and it's kind of slowed down, you know, slowed down a little bit, which is kind of a shame. But, you know, it is what it is, and it's great that it's still out there, that everyone can still enjoy it, you know.
You had a question over here.
You shared with me a story while I went up to your table earlier about your first days on the Muppet Show and who you worked with and all of that story. I know that any fan would get a kick out of that story.
Okay.
Did you share that with everyone?
Well, sure. Again, I was 19 years old, and Jim kind of picked me up by the scruff of the neck in Atlanta and dropped me in London, England. And I had done very little travel. I was very unsophisticated and unworldly and lost. And I had met Jim and Frank Oz, but they were also the guys who were producing this huge show at that point. And so it wasn't like we went out to dinner every night. I mean, we worked together, and they were busy. So I had to make my own way and start to meet people. And the first guest on the first episode that I worked on was Alice Cooper. And that was a huge deal for me because I was at my age and Alice Cooper was at his prime in those years, and I was a huge fan. I played in all these rock bands when I was in high school. So when I showed up, Alice Cooper was incredibly nice to me. For whatever reason, I guess I looked like this lost puppy. I was doing a few things, but I had a lot of time to stand around, and it's just the kind of person he was. He was very welcoming and accommodating and really friendly to me. And some of you might find this online, it was at a con last year. I pulled out a puppet I had built of Alice Cooper that I built in my teenage years prior to being a part of the Muppet Show. And I had taken this puppet to London on my Muppet Show time because I knew I was going to see Alice Cooper. So Jim was okay with me bringing this puppet of my own into the studio and getting my picture made with this puppet, myself, and Alice Cooper. I had this photo that was taken on the set of the Muppet Show, and Alice signed the puppet. So last year at one of the Comic-Cons, Alice was there, and we had seen each other periodically over the years once in a while. But I brought this puppet along, and during the photo op, we recreated that photo. So it's me now 40 years later, Alice 40 years later, and the puppet, which is falling apart 40 years later. And we did the same faces. So I've got the original photo and from '78 and the new photo from 2018, so 40 years apart. It was just an amazing thing for me to get to do that. He re-signed the puppet, you know. So that was very cool. And that was the nature of the Muppet Show. I mean, we worked very closely with all these kind of Hollywood legendary people who were super popular at the time, people I had grown up with, golden age of Hollywood stars, and just an amazing experience for a 19-year-old guy. Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon, but I do want to get any memories of the world of Fraggle Rock from you.
Well, Fraggle was my favorite project that I ever worked on, of all the things we did over the Muppet years with Jim and even beyond. It was just a kind of a magical time for me. I had been working with the Muppets about 6 years at that point. Jim got the show running on Fraggle Rock in Toronto, and he went off to do things like start developing Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and those, well, I guess by then we'd done Dark Crystal, probably Labyrinth. So he was kind of away doing other creative things, and he would come in and do characters once in a while. But mostly we were kind of left on our own to work with the producers there and all the folks who worked on that show. And we developed this amazing team of people that were really wonderful, like a family for about 5 years. And so it was just great. And I know I grew as a performer like crazy during my Wembley years, learning what it took to really create a character. And at the same time, Wembley was largely who I was, just this guy. I don't know whether you know the character, but he was very hyper, even more than I am at the moment. I just had some coffee. And he was all over the place and couldn't make up his mind. He would never be able to make a decision. And that's really who I was. So, again, therapy. I was just working things out, you know. It's interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is our time.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you all. Come back by and see me. That'd be great.